Hi, welcome to episode 5 of Art and Faith, Faith and Art. And this episode is entitled Graffiti. And this is part 1, and it's graffiti as mockery. Now, normally we regard graffiti as a kind of blight on the urban landscape. It kind of mars and defaces buildings and just makes everything a bit uglier than it already is. But at the same time, given the inventiveness and creativity of the human spirit, graffiti has also blossomed in the modern world into a recognized art form. It might not be to everyone's tastes, but there you have it. So in this episode, I'm going to show you remarkable graffiti. And first, a linguistic note. The word graffiti is kind of plural or collective noun, and the singular of graffiti is graffito. Now, the word graffito is almost never used in ordinary discourse, but art historians use this term. So graffito to describe an individual instance, and graffiti is to describe the collective. Now now we can all be kind of clever together, as it were. Now the graffiti I'm going to show you is from about the year 175, and it was etched into a rock that was kind of foundation stone in a building in Rome. And what you will see in this graffiti is one slave, presumably, making fun of the Christian faith of another slave. So I'm going to show you the image, and this is it, and this is the kind of photograph with kind of the kind of lines kind of drawn in for us so that we can read it. The original is not quite legible anymore, so this is what it would have looked like. And what we see here is we see an image of Christ on the cross from behind. So he has a naked male torso, bare-assed naked, and strangely he has the head of a donkey affixed to him. And we see another person off on the left-hand side hailing this image of Christ on the cross. And I'm going to show you, someone has very helpfully made a cartoon of this image. I'm going to show you that, and has a translation of the writing. So the cartoon says that Alexamenos worships his God. And there you see a kind of little portrait of Alexamenos from behind, hailing the image of Christ on the cross with the head of a donkey. So Alexamenos worships his God. So this is one slave mocking the faith of another slave. So some things never change. Now there's several interesting kind of features to note about this image. First of all, and remarkably, this is the first image that we have of Christ on the cross. Images of Christ on the cross don't begin to appear with any regularity until the 5th century, around the year 420. And perhaps in a subsequent lecture we'll look at some of those also very remarkable images. So this is a kind of precious image for us, one of the earliest depictions of Christ on the cross. And what's going on here, I think, is that in the kind of Roman world, crucifixion was a bloody and a shameful death. It was reserved for the worst criminals. A Roman citizen couldn't be crucified. He had to be executed in some other way. That's why St. Paul, for example, was beheaded. He was a Roman citizen. So this is for non-citizens, for common criminals, and for the lowest of the low. And it's a very kind of public form of execution. The criminal is kind of strung naked on the cross, and all the kind of blood and kind of writhing in pain of his body is evident for all to see. So this slave is saying, well, look at the God you worship. He's just a kind of common criminal. And the ass's head, I think, is also kind of interesting. There was Christianity and Judaism were kind of minority religions in the Roman Empire. A very small percentage of people in the Roman Empire were either Christians or Jews, and there was a lot of misunderstanding about what they actually did and what they actually believed. So, for example, Christians, because they met together early in the morning in private homes, people thought, well, what are they doing in there? This looks suspicious. And as the kind of truth of the Eucharist began to filter out, people began to accuse Christians of being kind of cannibals, which was absurd. But there was also a story that the Jews worshipped an ass or a donkey. And who knows what the origin of that story is, but there you have it. And so here, in the Roman Empire, Christianity could very well have been seen as a kind of sect within Judaism. So it's easy to see how what the Jews were accused of could be transferred to the Christians in this kind of context. But the image of the ass is also kind of interesting for another set of reasons. And this image, which begins as an image of mockery by a strange and kind of wondrous transposition, can be seen as a kind of proclamation of an essential truth of our Catholic faith. So a donkey is a kind of lowly and a humble animal that bears our burdens. And when Christ entered into Jerusalem, which we'll commemorate tomorrow, which is Palm Sunday, he didn't enter into Jerusalem riding a kind of chariot carried by a magnificent kind of horse, as the Roman emperors did when they entered a city, but he entered in riding on a donkey. So a very kind of humble animal, kind of perhaps slightly kind of ridiculous. So there you can see an image, and this is from one of the sarcophagi in the catacombs, an image of Christ riding a donkey as he enters into the city of Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. But in a strange, I said, wondrous transposition, the donkey can be seen as an image of Christ, that as the donkey is a lowly and a humble animal who bears our burdens, so Christ himself, in his kind of self-emptying humility, he, as St. Peter says in his epistle, he bore our sins in his own body on the tree, so that being dead to sin, we ourselves might live on to righteousness. So a graffiti, a kind of mockery, turned in a strange way into a proclamation of one of the essential truths of our Christian faith.